Welcome to Living Your Dreams. My name is Nancy Cantor. I'm your hostess. And on Living Your Dreams, what we do is we interview people who are living their dreams, but also people who can help you live yours. I am the Chief Dream Officer of the Dream Factory community here in Metro West, and it's designed to support women in taking on their lives, their work, and their world. Today, I'm really excited to have Carla Cataldo. She's a longtime Dream Factory member, and she helps nonprofits get and receive and benefit from the funds that are out there so that they can fulfill on their important missions. Welcome, Carla.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
I'm excited you're here. And where I wanted to start today is to give me a little bit of, I know you work with nonprofits. I'm sure that there's a myriad of things that you do and how you help them. I know you've written a book. I know there's a lot of people out there who are interested in that. But I wanted to start with how you started in your field. I know you've had a lot of interest in politics and making a difference in local communities. How did you start out?
It seems like a long time ago now, but I actually got my master's degree in public policy. So
Okay.
I was working in government, and more specifically local government, and I had to learn and write a lot of grants for the state, for the federal government. After Proposition 2.5 was instituted in Massachusetts, a lot of the cities and towns really needed to find every source of money they could
Now,
to
just
stay
say
within
a little
budget.
bit for people who don't know what Proposition 2.5 is. What was that?
Proposition 2.5 is a law which limits municipalities to raising only their tax levy only by 2.5% in any given year. So prior to 1980, there was no such restriction. When I got into the field, it was already on the books. So if that levy increase of 2.5% wasn't sufficient to meet an inner city need or any kind of city need, for the most part, it just didn't work well for the cities. Given the costs that were going up in all these different areas, often exceeded 2.5%, that were totally outside of their control. So we had to scramble to find money from the state and from the federal government.
So you got good at writing grants.
I did. When you have to write a federal government grant for, say, housing supports, a small family foundation looks much easier in comparison.
And is it so you worked for government when you first started out. And then how did you gravitate to what you're doing now?
I had an epiphany when I was pregnant with my first child. A lot of municipal government is driven by night meetings that volunteers have. And I just couldn't. I realized I couldn't walk out the door at 4:30, 5 o'clock and go to a daycare and pick up my daughter, because so much of the business related on emergencies, what other people were doing that weren't in your control. The press would call, legislators would call. I couldn't do the job the way I wanted to do it or had been doing it if I had to be out the door at a certain time. So I realized I really needed to make a shift at that point.
Great. And so how did you make that shift? Because I think that's interesting for people, that you're working on something. It's something you're good at. It's you went to, where'd you go? You went to Harvard to get trained in public policy.
Yep.
So
Master's program.
you're very well trained in what you did. But then when you were pregnant with your first child, you saw you couldn't work the way you traditionally had been working. So how did you make that transition?
Well, being a stay-at-home mom after working day and night is a big transition right there. But certainly by the time I had my second child, I'd gone back to work part-time to accommodate that shift. By the time number 2 came along, the economic reality for families is 2 in daycare or 2 or more is really not cost-effective unless you are making big bucks. We just don't have family-friendly workplace policies still to this day in this country, unfortunately. And so I had to make another shift. And I decided at that point, being a consultant and working for myself made the most sense.
So how did you start to generate? So here you are, you have 2 kids. You were probably staying at home at that point, or you're working part-time.
Right.
So how'd you make the shift into your own business?
It was something I was thinking about, and I actually met up with a wonderful woman who's actually the co-author of my book from Wayland, and she was doing the same thing. She was consulting on her own, same field, so we decided to team up, and we formed a partnership. which made it a lot less scary for somebody like me who'd been on the government payroll and then transitioning to nonprofit work part-time after the government work. So it made being an entrepreneur a lot less scary, having somebody to go in it with.
That's great. And what was her name?
Gail Shapiro.
Okay, great. So, and how did you find her?
We met at a workshop or a conference that was sponsored by the local community foundation.
So you met her.
Yep.
She was already consulting.
Correct.
And so you figured if you teamed up in partnership, it wouldn't be as scary.
For me, it wouldn't be as scary. For her, she really liked the discipline of having somebody to account to and also to do joint marketing with. And so that's how we started out. We did a joint marketing letter, and that yielded good results. And we went from there.
And what did you create a company together?
We did. We formed a partnership.
And what was the company called?
Cataldo and Shapiro, Proposal Writing and Consultation.
Oh, very
So we
nice.
kind of sounded like a law firm there.
It does. It sounds
Or
very,
CPA or
it
something.
sounds very official.
Yes.
So the two of you work together, and now you work separately.
Correct.
I mean, was there a reason you started working? Did you have like different interests after a while, or?
Yeah, there were some shifting family dynamics that were going on in each of our lives that just suggested it was time to shift again. And it was very easy and very amicable. She wanted to go in a slightly different direction with her career at that point. And we still work together and co-wrote a book together, so we still do a lot of things together. Our business formation's different.
Great. So you went off on your own.
Yeah.
And then why don't you say a little bit about the kinds of people that you help? Tell me something about your clients.
Most of my clients are nonprofits, although I do occasionally have some city work or town work, municipality work still, which is fine, and I love that still. And it's nice to keep my hand in, even though it's getting further and further away from me. But I do like it, and what I do is I help generate more revenue for either the city, the town, or the nonprofit in any number of ways.
Why don't you give me some examples of some of those ways?
Okay.
How do you make more money?
Well, it's always a challenge. Even
Okay.
good times, bad times, it's always a challenge raising more money. But there is money. The good news is there is money out there to be had. And one way I do that is through strategic planning.
Okay.
And I remember one client I had was a Boston nonprofit, and they helped provide affordable quality daycare services for families in need, and they also trained women to become professionals in the daycare field. They were struggling, and they decided to bring me in to facilitate a strategic plan. And after working through some very confusing issues with the board and some key staff members, we came up with a great consensus on a number of puzzling things that were facing this agency. Not only that, it helped bring clarity to them in terms of some of the questions they were facing, like whether or not to pick up a program from another nonprofit that was going out of business. And they really didn't know how to think about it. By the end of the 2-evening process, it was very clear that they should not pick up this program from another failing nonprofit. So we came out with some 3 or 4 long-range goals for them to see them through the next few years. And we built consensus to help them grow, which they did.
Isn't that great?
It was, and the best part was some people really didn't want to be going through this process with all the other issues facing them at the time. But one of the long-serving board members who'd been there for decades said that it was the best strategic planning process she'd ever done, and she'd been there a long time.
Well, it sounds like in doing that kind of a process that people create more of a team.
Yeah, and they desperately needed that.
Yeah. I mean, in my experience in working with different kinds of companies, a lot of times people are going off in different directions, and they never really face the key issues that they really need to look at. So it sounds like you really help people do that.
And that's really important when you're raising money, because everyone has to have the same vision. They have to have the same goals, where they'd like to be in a few years. And if there isn't that common consensus in language, it's really hard to articulate why you need money when there's so many other competing groups out there who also need money and would be happy to tell you why they should be getting your charitable dollar.
Yeah. So it seems like the